Kaydee already has a name. Some viewers have already given her something more. A crown. The new female beside Shadow. The next partner at the Big Bear nest. Maybe even the eagle who will one day stand where Jackie once stood. And after everything the cameras have captured in August, it is easy to understand why. Kaydee has entered the nest. She has moved sticks. She has spent hours near Shadow. She has shared a favored roost tree with him. She has called across the valley with him at sunrise. She has followed him through the territory. And twice now, Friends of Big Bear Valley has documented something remarkably specific. Shadow left and Kaydee was only about 2 seconds behind him. Then a raptor biologist who actually helped band Kaydee gave the strongest assessment yet. Pete Bloom said Shadow and Kaydee currently appeared to be forming a pair bond. He went even further, saying it was highly likely they would be a pair when nesting activity begins around December. So why are we still asking whether Kaydee is really Shadow's next queen? Why not simply say yes? Because highly likely is not the same thing as already established. And that difference may be the most important part of the entire story. Science is not telling us no. Science is telling us something far more interesting. Not yet. And not yet is very different from where this story began. On August 6, Kaydee was not a future queen. She was a banded subadult eagle appearing in Big Bear. That was all anyone could safely say. Her lavender band marked Kaydee 1 eventually connected her to the Prado Basin in Southern California. She had been banded in April 2022 and was believed to have hatched about a month earlier, making her roughly 4.5 years old when she appeared in Big Bear. That age immediately made her interesting. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service says most bald eagles are capable of breeding at 4 or 5 years old, although some do not begin breeding until they are older. Kaydee had reached exactly the stage when a wandering eagle can begin moving toward an adult breeding life. But capable of breeding does not mean ready to breed, and it certainly does not mean she had already chosen Shadow. That distinction matters because the first interactions between them were much less romantic than later moments would make them look. On August 7, a nearly mature banded eagle joined Shadow at one of his favored perch trees. Shadow left in less than 30 seconds. The visitor waited about a minute and headed out in the same direction. At the time, Friends of Big Bear Valley did not describe this as courtship. They noted that several bald eagles of different ages had been appearing around the valley, and that visitors during the off-season were not unusual. Think about how different that feels from the story people are telling now. Shadow did not immediately settle beside her. There was no dramatic acceptance, no obvious declaration of partnership. Just a resident eagle leaving a perch and another eagle eventually moving in the same direction. Then Kaydee kept appearing, and this is where the evidence began to change. On August 10, Kaydee 1 visited the nest. 3 days later, on August 13th, Shadow glided into that same nest with Kaydee not far behind. By then, observers could compare the two birds more closely. Kaydee appeared larger than Shadow. Friends of Big Bear Valley noted that female bald eagles are typically larger than males, and said they were leaning toward female, although no DNA testing had been done when Kaydee 1 was banded. But what really captured attention was not her size. It was what she did near Shadow. Kaydee stayed close. She interacted with the nest. She moved sticks. She made the kind of gentle physical contact that viewers naturally read as affection. Suddenly, the question changed. Was this just a visitor? Or were the cameras watching the beginning of something? Friends of Big Bear Valley asked essentially that question themselves. Their answer was careful. A new bond could be forming. It also might not be. They said the real picture would become clearer when breeding season arrived later in the fall or winter. That was August 13. If the story had stopped there, the title of this video would have been easy to answer. Is Kaydee Shadow's next queen? Not enough evidence, but the story did not stop. The following day produced a quieter clue. Kaydee was already perched at Twin Pines. Then Shadow came to her. He landed on the same branch. After some time, he moved lower in the tree. They spent several hours in the same area before Kaydee eventually left. That detail changes the picture because it prevents us from telling a simple story in which Kaydee is chasing Shadow everywhere he goes. Sometimes Kaydee followed Shadow, but here Shadow joined Kaydee. The association was beginning to look less one-directional. Still not proof, but no longer just one unusual afternoon at the nest. Then came the morning calls. Before sunrise on August 18th, Shadow and Kaydee 1 could be heard vocalizing in the valley. Friends of Big Bear Valley described it as a morning duet. But once again, they resisted turning a beautiful moment into a final verdict. Friendship, something deeper. They continued to watch. And this is exactly where viewers can make a very understandable mistake. A duet sounds romantic. Two eagles sitting together looks romantic. Preening looks romantic. But bald eagle biology does not give us a simple translation dictionary. A call does not mean love. A shared tree does not mean mate. A touch does not mean permanent bond. Outside breeding periods. Bald eagles can interact socially, gather around productive habitat, roost around other eagles, and vocalize. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service specifically notes the social interaction and vocalizing that occur around communal roosts. So the morning calls were interesting, but they were not the crown. Then August 19 arrived. Tuesday evening, Shadow and Kaydee had been seen in a favored roost tree. Wednesday morning, both called out across the valley. Later, Shadow flew into the Twin Pines perch tree. Less than a minute later, Kaydee joined him. They stayed on different branches for about 3 hours. Then Shadow left. Kaydee followed only 2 seconds later. Later that evening, the cameras found them together in the roost tree again. Kaydee left briefly for the nest, then returned to where Shadow was. The day ended with both eagles vocalizing. Now the case looked different. Not because 2 seconds is some biological rule. There is no scientific threshold saying that if an eagle follows another within 2 seconds, they are forming a pair. The importance was repetition. Roost, morning calls. Twin Pines, 3 hours. Shadow leaves. Kaydee follows. Same roost again. Nest visit. Return. Those observations crossed several categories of behavior in one day. That is much more interesting than one romantic-looking photograph. But there was still another explanation. What if Kaydee was not choosing Shadow? What if she was choosing Big Bear? This is where Pete Bloom introduced one of the most useful biological clues in the entire story. Bloom has studied and banded raptors for more than 40 years and was involved in banding Kaydee 1. I explained that many eagles around 4 years old enter a stage of prospecting. They inspect territories. They look for vacancies. They investigate large trees and established eagle areas. And for many raptors, Bloom said territory can come first, mate second. That changes everything. Big Bear itself is valuable. There is a lake, food, perch trees, an established nest, a resident adult male. A young eagle approaching breeding age does not need a romantic reason to investigate that environment. She could arrive because the territory is attractive. She could watch Shadow because he already knows that territory. She could follow his movements because a resident eagle carries information about where to perch, where to feed, and how the landscape is used. In other words, even repeated association does not automatically mean Kaydee entered Big Bear looking for a mate. But that explanation creates another possibility. She may have come for the territory first, and then discovered Shadow. The two ideas do not cancel each other out. A good territory can create the conditions in which a pair bond becomes possible. National Park Service information on bald eagles notes that pair bonds may be partly or even wholly dependent on territory quality. Now look again at Kaydee. She is near breeding age. She has discovered productive habitat. She has access to an established nest. The resident male is tolerating her presence. Sometimes he joins her. Sometimes she follows him. They spend extended periods in the same parts of the territory. That still does not make her Shadow's next mate. But now the alternative explanations are beginning to overlap. Territory prospecting and pair formation may be happening at the same time. And then came the assessment that pushed the story farther than friends of Big Bear Valley had been willing to push it days earlier. On August 21, Pete Bloom said Shadow and Kaydee currently seemed to be forming a pair bond. He called it highly likely that they would indeed be a pair when nesting begins around December. That is a major statement, and it creates an apparent contradiction with this video's title. If an experienced raptor biologist says a future pairing is highly likely, how can science still say not yet? Because Bloom was making a prediction, a strong prediction, an informed prediction, but still a prediction about what these birds are likely to become. He did not say breeding had already begun. He did not say Kaydee was permanently established. I did not say eggs were coming. He did not say one behavior had confirmed the outcome. In fact, the wording itself contains the distinction. They currently seem to be forming a pair bond. Forming, that is a process, not a completed verdict. And this may be the biggest reason Kaydee's story is worth watching right now. We are not arriving after the answer. We may be watching the answer develop. Bloom also pointed to specific behaviors. Kaydee was larger than Shadow. She was moving sticks. She was nibbling or preening him. He said these were behaviors that can assist in forming pair bonds. The stick behavior deserves special attention, because nest activity can become much more important as the season advances. The National Park Service says that although bald eagle courtship includes spectacular aerial displays, Nest building is believed to be even more critical in establishing bonds. Both sexes participate in nest construction, and established pairs can return to and enlarge nests over repeated seasons. But again, timing matters. Kaydee moving a stick in August is not the same thing as a bonded pair performing sustained nest preparation before egg laying. One stick is a clue. Repeated coordinated nest work would be stronger evidence. That is one of the tests still ahead. Then August 23 gave the story another push. Friends of Big Bear Valley reported that Shadow and Kaydee were found in the morning where they had been left the previous evening. They greeted the day with calls across the valley. Kaydee then went to the nest. Later, Shadow appeared at the lookout snag while Kaydee was at another favored perch. When Shadow headed out, Kaydee followed 2 seconds behind him again. Again, that word matters. The first 2-second follow was interesting. The second occurrence makes the first one part of a repeatable pattern. Still not proof, but the evidence is no longer moving backward. It is accumulating, and that gives us the real midpoint answer to the question. Is Kaydee really Shadow's next queen? She is much closer to that possibility than she was when she first appeared. That is what the current evidence supports. The strongest argument is not the preening, not the stick, not the duet, not the 2-second following, not the roost tree. It is that all of those behaviors are beginning to appear around the same 2 birds. Different categories, different days, different places, same association. That is what makes the case stronger. But the final test belongs to the future. What happens when summer ends? What happens when the season begins to change? Does Kaydee continue using Big Bear consistently? Does she remain close to Shadow as breeding behavior becomes more relevant? Does nest activity increase? Does Shadow participate with her? Do the two begin coordinated nest maintenance? Does territorial behavior become more clearly shared? Do the behaviors seen casually in August become structured behaviors in fall and winter? That is where possible can begin turning into established. And there is another reason not to crown Kaydee too quickly. She is young. At roughly 4.5 years old, she is at the lower end of the age when bald eagles can breed. The Fish and Wildlife Service says most are capable of breeding at 4 or 5, but some do not begin until older. Pete Bloom also warned that young eagles can make serious mistakes when they first attempt to raise offspring and often improve with experience. So even if Shadow and Kaydee become an established pair, that would not mean the rest of the story becomes predictable. Pair formation would be only the beginning. Nest preparation would be another stage. Mating another. Egg laying another. Incubation another. And raising eaglets successfully is an entirely different challenge. That is why the word queen can be fun for viewers, but biology does not recognize a coronation. There is no single afternoon when Kaydee officially inherits a title. Wild eagles build relationships through behavior over time. The camera gives us moments. Science asks whether those moments form a consistent pattern. Right now they increasingly do. But the last part of the pattern has not happened yet. And perhaps that is the most exciting answer possible. Because not yet is not disappointment. It is suspense. On August 6, Kaydee was a visitor. By August 13, she was entering the nest with Shadow. By August 14, Shadow was joining her at Twin Pines. By August 18th, their calls were echoing across the valley before sunrise. By August 19, they were sharing roosting space, spending hours in the same tree, and moving through the territory in close sequence. By August 21, the biologist who helped band Kaydee publicly said they appeared to be forming a pair bond and predicted that a pairing by nesting season was highly likely. And by August 23, the cameras had captured another sunrise together and another 2-second follow. That is a remarkable amount of change in less than 3 weeks, but it is still less than 3 weeks. That perspective matters. An established bald eagle partnership can last for years. The Big Bear nest itself carries years of history. Kaydee's association with Shadow is still new enough that almost every day can change how we interpret it. She can stay. She can leave. The association can strengthen. It can stall. A breeding season can confirm what August seemed to be building toward. Or nature can take the story somewhere no one predicted. So no, science has not placed a crown on Kaydee's head. Not yet. But science is no longer looking at her as just another passing eagle either. The evidence has moved. The expert assessment has moved. The behavior has moved. The question itself has moved. At first, viewers asked whether Kaydee would come back. Then they asked whether Shadow would tolerate her. Then whether she might be female. Then whether a bond might be forming. Now an experienced biologist believes a future pair is highly likely. That progression is the story. And the next chapter will not be decided by what viewers call Kaydee. It will be decided by what Kaydee and Shadow keep doing. Watch the nest as fall approaches. Watch whether those sticks begin to move more often. Watch the favored perch trees. Watch who arrives after whom. Watch whether the shared roosting continues. Watch whether their movements become increasingly coordinated. Because the strongest evidence will not be one spectacular moment. It will be consistency. If the same two eagles continue choosing the same territory, the same nest, and increasingly each other as breeding season approaches, there may eventually come a point when not yet is no longer the careful answer. But we are not there today. Today, Kaydee is something more interesting than a confirmed queen. She is a possibility becoming stronger in real time, a visitor who stayed, a young eagle entering adulthood, a prospecting bird that found a valuable territory, a companion Shadow has repeatedly allowed into his space. And according to one of the biologists who knew her before Big Bear ever did, an eagle who may very well be in the process of becoming his next mate. So is Kaydee really Shadow's next queen? The evidence says she could be. The latest expert assessment says the odds may now be very good. But science still leaves one word between possibility and certainty. Yet. And if Kaydee is still beside Shadow when the nest begins to matter again, that may be the word we eventually get to remove.